Hey, this is Ben from Ready.Set.Van. Today we're going to talk about performance upgrades that you can make to your Promaster van. We're going to start by doing just an overview of how suspension works, and then we're going to talk about some spring upgrades that you can make, shock upgrades that you can make, and also lift kit options that exist for the Promaster. When we're done with that, we're going to install a bunch of equipment on this van that's right behind me, and then we're going to take it out, do a little before and after comparison, take it on a trail, and see how it performs. So let's check it out. Every vehicle's suspension system has two main components to it. It has a set of springs and it has a set of shocks. These leaf springs are designed to carry the full weight of the vehicle back here. That's really the job of the springs, is to carry the vehicle while also allowing travel for the wheel up and down. If you only had springs in your vehicle, it would be very, very difficult to drive. It would be bouncing around all the time, be very difficult to control, and be honestly quite dangerous. And so shock absorbers' job are to literally absorb all that chaotic energy that exists when you're driving around just on springs. They absorb all that energy and try and stabilize the van so that you can drive safely, so that it corners well, and so that it can react and respond to bumps in the road without causing you more trouble. As I just mentioned, the purpose of the springs is to provide that force pushing up on the van while also allowing the wheels to articulate over bumps and different kinds of terrain. Of course, the amount of force that's going to be required to hold up your van is going to depend on how much your van weighs. In our case, we've got a Promaster with a base camper build made by us. Our base camper build weighs about 1,600 pounds, 1,600 pounds. If you're driving around like a Travato or something like that, you're probably all the way up in the 2,400 pounds before adding water and gear and things like that. If you have a heavy build and you don't have enough spring force pushing back up, supporting that van, your van is going to start to sag. One of the problems with sag is also that you lose a significant amount of your suspension travel. So you're going to bottom out on bumps. It's going to drive like a really heavy couch. You're not going to enjoy it. Also, if you don't have enough spring rate, you're going to feel the vehicle roll a lot. So when you're going like on an on-ramp, for example, it's really going to feel like it's tipping over. Also on the highway, you're going to be much more susceptible to crosswinds or wind blasts from trucks coming by. One of the most common ways to improve an undersprung van is to add what's simply called helper springs. Helper springs are basically what they sound like. They are extra springs that help the existing springs perform better. And so basically you're just adding more spring rate, adding more force to just get that van back up into that natural driving position where it wants to be. You'll get all of your suspension travel back, you'll be stiffer around corners, you won't get blown around as much on the highway, all things that you want. The most common helper spring setup are these things called Sumo Springs. They're fantastic. One of the things that's great about them is they are incredibly easy to install. If you're comfortable installing or changing a tire on your van, you can install these yourself. That makes them very affordable, and it makes them very accessible, and it makes them really the first choice. If you're looking to improve your suspension setup on your van, it's really the first place to start. It's going to be a very noticeable difference. It's going to stiffen everything up, and it's going to improve things tremendously. And in my hand here I have the Sumo Spring, which is an elastomer spring, and it is designed to go in place of this bump stop here. So we've got the axle and the leaf spring back here that's going to be traveling up and down. Occasionally it would bump into this bump stop, but what we're actually going to do is we're going to remove this bump stop and place this Sumo Spring in its place. The Sumo Spring is going to work in concert with the existing leaf spring pack and boost that spring rate by about 15%. That should stiffen up the ride and improve all of those handling characteristics that we were just talking about. This is the front suspension assembly. This is where the front wheel would be. This is our front shock, and this is our front spring. And in my hand here is the front Sumo Spring. Basically, these are going to get installed. So this slides onto the spring, and it goes in between these coils and provides that extra spring power. The way your shocks work to control the movement of your vehicle is to convert the massive amount of kinetic energy that's created every time you hit a bump or a pothole or something like that, and convert that into thermal energy or heat. It does that by constricting the flow of oil through your reservoir of your shock. That oil is pushed through these very narrow passageways and some valves. It's that constriction or that friction that allows the shock to absorb that tremendous amount of chaotic energy that's going on and stabilize the vehicle. Of course, a direct effect of all of that friction is heat, and that heat builds up in the oil. If the oil gets hot enough, the viscosity of the oil is going to start to fall pretty rapidly. And that's just like oil in a pan. You heat it up, it gets very thin and very runny. If this is filled with very thin and runny oil, those very narrow constrictive passageways suddenly aren't very constricting at all, and the oil can flow through very quickly. And that's a phenomenon that is typically referred to as shock fade, where basically the performance of your shock starts to fade as it gets hotter and hotter as you use it more and more. Traveling down a dirt road is a good example of a place where you might experience shock fade. If you're going down a dirt road, it's got a lot of washboard bumps and maybe some fire breaks and some other things like that. You're going to be compressing and expanding that shock over and over and over, and it's possible that heat might build up in the shock, and then the shock's performance might start to degrade. A high quality set of shocks like Bilstein's are exceptionally good at dissipating heat and are typically known to just really not have any shock fade issues. So that's one big reason to upgrade your shocks. These shocks also have a velocity sensing valving circuit. So that also means that it's going to dynamically adjust its performance based to the actual performance and the speed at which you're driving and things like that. That'll be the thing that you feel when you first drive the van with a new set of shocks. It's just going to feel planted. It's going to feel stable. That's the valving. That's basically what you're experiencing there. And then the last thing is longevity. So typically the OEM shocks don't last the life of the vehicle. They're replaced at least one time over the course of the life of the vehicle. The seals tend to blow. High quality set of shocks like these Bilsteins should last for the entire life of the vehicle. The rear installation is very simple. It just basically just bolts right in. So there's not a lot of labor involved doing a rear set. The front set is quite a bit more involved. So up inside the strut tower over there, there's the coil and then the mount up at the top. To get to the top, we have to go through the dashboard. None of this is like such a big deal, but it's a lot of steps, and it definitely impacts the cost. So that's something to consider, when trying to figure out whether to just do, rear shocks or whether to also do front shocks. If your use case is that you're mostly going to be on the road and you aren't going to be doing a lot of off-road or a lot of long-distance dirt road driving, then it might make the most sense to just do the rear shocks. The cost will be significantly less than doing both the rear and the front. So the last thing to talk about are lift options, and more than any other option, lifts really are just a matter of personal preference. They are hotly debated on all the internet forums. There's pros and cons to lifting, to not lifting. So it really does come down to personal preference, what your goals are, what your use case is, and what you're trying to achieve. So this van actually belongs to me, and my goals for this van are really to be able to use it to get out there and find those dirt roads that seems like nobody goes down, and go see what's at the end of them. And that's really what I like to do. I want to be off the pavement as much as possible. That doesn't mean that I'm going 4x4ing or like doing anything extreme. It really just means that I just kind of want to be in the woods, and I want to feel like I have a little more capacity to do that. The Promasters have like a slight downward rake. That refers to like the way the Promaster is, like its nose is lower than its tail. And I don't really love that look, so I'd like to try and correct that a little bit. But in doing that, I'm also going to gain a little bit of clearance under the front of the van. So this is the Van Compass 1.5 inch front lift kit. It's just a spacer block. This spacer block gets attached, if this is your front strut, it gets attached on top of this whole strut mechanism. And it basically lifts the front of the van 1.5 inches. That will give me another 1.5 inches of clearance under the engine and some of the things that are under there, just in case I were to come across a rock or a stump or something like that that I didn't see. So that'll give me a little bit more peace of mind. It's possible to also put a spacer block in the rear, so we could lift both the front and the rear. In fact, we've done that for a number of people, and that's great. It looks great. You keep the rake, but you just lift the whole van about 1.5 inches. The Promaster has this like trailing rear bar, and that's always going to be your lowest point on the vehicle. So if you're trying to get over bigger obstacles or rocks or whatever like that, you're really not getting any benefit by doing that. You're literally just lifting the van chassis up higher. Okay, so we finished the lift kit and the shocks and struts and also the spring upgrades. And I'm pretty pleased with how it looks. And I'm also really excited about the extra clearance I'm getting under the front. It's about 2 1/4 inches extra clearance under the engine and about another 1/2 inch in the back. So I'm going to take it on the road, see how it feels, and then on some trails. So let's do that. So I think I mentioned this before, but this is actually my personal van, and I've never actually driven this exact suspension setup, so I'm pretty stoked to check it out and see what it's like. So let's hit the road. Right out of the gate, I have to say, just driving around town, it's quite a noticeable difference in the feel of the van. It's a lot stiffer. It feels a lot more responsive to my inputs. I just sort of have a general sense like it's not rolling as much. And I can feel the road quite a bit more. Okay, so we're going about 65 now on the highway, and you know, already it feels pretty good. Like I do little inputs, and yeah, it's you know, it feels a little more confident, a little more compliant. Just kind of do a couple swerves. Yeah, I like this a lot more. So it's not you know, it's not like we're suddenly driving a new vehicle, because that's definitely not the case. It's still a big, heavy van, but I definitely feel more confident making sudden movements on the highway than I did before. So far, so good. I'm pretty stoked. Just driving down this dirt road with these washboard bumps, it's actually it's doing real nice. I have to say, like, you know, previously, you know, there would be you hit enough of these washboard bumps, you'd start to feel like you were skating around a little bit on the road, but you know, so far I'm very pleased. It's really nice being back here in the Pine Barrens. I love it back here. It's like by far, I think, my favorite part of New Jersey. So it's definitely stiffer, that's for sure. It's not outrageously stiff, and I feel like the shocks are taking in these bigger bumps really well. I'm gonna make a turn here. This is a pretty bumpy one. There we go. Yeah, that was nice. That was good. On these smaller bumps, I think you feel them a little bit more. But so far, I feel like when the big bumps come along, it's soaking them up really nicely. Woo. All right. You know, really, my goal is I want to make sure I can get back in the places that I want to get to. So it's really a matter more of capability than you know, real kind of performance. Just pulling up to the lake here, and it is just starting to freeze over. That is beautiful. I'm really pleased with the way it worked out. I think it's going to help me a lot with my goals for this van, which is to really get back into places like this that are a bit more remote, a bit more out of the way, so I can experience nature really in its purest form whenever possible. Please consider subscribing, liking. Please comment below and let us know if you've put a suspension kit on your ProMaster, if it's different than ours, or any other suspension kits that maybe you're interested in. In a minute, we're going to turn these cameras off, and I'm just going to have a chance to just sit here and just really soak in all of this beauty and honestly all of this quiet. I just love how quiet it is here. I hope that for you and your goals for van life and life in general, I hope that you get there. Peace.